I'm Leandra Lederman.
I'm Allison Christians, and it's time to break into tax.
Today's topic is tax LLM programs.
When students ask me this question, should I take an LLM in tax? My first response is a question back. What's the objective of the LLM?
Not only do both of us have a tax LLM, but neither of us are currently at institutions that offer a tax LLM.
That's right. Neither one of us is trying to recruit any students for our LLM program.
That's right. So we have the benefit of, I would say, objectivity from the standpoint of we're trying to counsel our students whether they should go to a tax LLM program at another school or perhaps do something different. But we also have the background experience that we both did earn the degree, both of us at NYU, actually. And then while I was clerking at the US Tax Court, I took one class in Georgetown's Tax LLM program because I hadn't taken anything on pension law while I was in the LLM, and I was interested in that.
I did the LLM part-time while I was working full-time, and I loved it and didn't love it at the same time. On one hand, it was efficient. On the other hand, I don't think I really got the social aspect out of that LLM or the networking out of it. I really just got the training.
So how long did it take you to do the LLM part-time?
Well, it took me 3.5 years, and I will tell you, it was a slog because I was working full time all those 3.5 years, and work sometimes interfered with the LLM, and sometimes the LLM interfered with work. I left work, I went and took my class, and I often went back to work after class. So you're switching gears a lot. You're trying to learn something for a couple hours a day while you're learning something completely different at work. So it's challenging. This is not for somebody who doesn't want to immerse themselves in tax. This is not something to take lightly. This is something that you say, okay, this is going to be hard work for several years. But at the end of the 3 years, or 3.5 years in my case, I will have learned a lot about a bunch of topics, and they will in some way relate to the work I'm doing, maybe making me a better lawyer.
And did the law firm pay for it? Because that was certainly the case when I was in practice, and is still, I think, reasonably common now.
Yeah, I don't think I would have done it if I had to pay the tuition, to be honest, because it was prohibitive. The law firm was paying for the part-time program, but had I taken it full-time as you did, when I came in, I would no longer have been a first year. I would have been treated as a second year.
Yeah, and I went full-time, and I was in the somewhat unusual position of going full-time after having been practicing tax. It's fairly common for people to either be in tax practice and get the LLM part-time, as you did, or come straight out of the JD program and go into the tax LLM program, or be practicing in some other area of law for a while, realize that is not one's dream job and that one has a desire to shift into tax, and then go to a tax LLM program full time as a way to transition into a career in tax.
Yeah, so if you just really want to get immersed in tax law, tax all day long, then a full-time LLM is a great idea. It's really going to take you up the mountain of learning on tax law in a relatively short amount of time.
So let me give you one anecdote, which is when I was practicing at White and Case in the early 1990s, what one of the partners said to me is that in his experience, he was able to tell for the first 3 years of an associate's time at the firm whether or not that associate had a tax LLM, but that after 3 years, he could no longer tell. And I think the reason was because 3 years of experience working in the law firm, that associate got to know the tax concepts for the areas on the matters that the firm was involved in, that the knowledge level was indistinguishable from someone who had a tax LLM. But just be aware that the person who has the tax LLM is probably also going to have had exposure to quite a number of additional tax issues that might never come up in the day-to-day work in a particular law firm.
So you can think of a tax LLM as kind of being an acceleration of training.
Plus additional breadth. You would get acceleration of training, for example, on corporate tax issues that you might put into practice in a transactional tax type practice. But at the same time, you might have taken gift and estate tax and the LLM program and tax procedure, and you might not be doing any estate planning or tax controversy work, but it does give you a broader perspective than someone who's never been exposed to those issues.
I get this question a lot. Should I do an LLM? So there's a couple of different reasons that you might be thinking about taking an LLM. And we have to think about them in the context of, are you thinking about an LLM, in your own country, or is this a way to break into a new geographic place? So let's talk about in-country first before we talk about cross-border. So for in-country, the reason to take an LLM might be to expand your training in a new area of law. And so if you discover tax as a JD student, you might be interested in taking an LLM because now you want to take all these different classes in tax.
What you can generally expect from an LLM program is that you're going to probably be taking something like 5 tax courses a semester for 2 semesters if you're going full time, and that those tax classes will move a lot faster than your JD tax classes, and the topics will be divided up in somewhat different ways. So you might take a class on timing or taxation of property transactions, and those wouldn't be the names of courses that you would likely find at the JD level.
Wow, I feel like you and I took the same program. I have those books on my shelf still. I also have tax procedure. That's a whole class that you wouldn't take as a JD usually, but
I teach that.
do you? Tax procedure, really?
That's my specialty. I mean, I go through a casebook on it.
I don't know how many classes there are at the JD level in tax procedure, but impressive. Yeah, I think the variety of classes and the depth of the classes is a really good reason to look at an LLM.
The students who go on full-time to get an LLM, in my experience, generally do it right after the JD program. It's like one of my students a year maybe, and it's usually one of 2 situations. One is the person discovered tax pretty late in their JD career, so they haven't had time to take all of the classes that they would have taken that would have prepared them to break into tax. The other situation is, especially at times when the job market is really weak. I've had students who are in a situation where they've taken a number of tax classes, they're applying for jobs, and they're not sure they're going to get the job they want. And they're thinking they might be in a position like getting a job doing corporate law, which doesn't interest them as much, and not having a tax job, and they could kind of delay for a year, get specialized tax training, and then go back on the job market, and they'll have the credential and the job market may be better. So sometimes I've had students in that situation where they're simultaneously applying for tax LLM programs and doing a job search. And if they were to get a job in tax, they wouldn't go and get an LLM full-time. Maybe they would go later if they're in a major market that offers an LLM program. They might go later part-time, but they're only using the full-time application as kind of a backup to their job search.
So if you are going into an LLM to get training, specialized training, specifically in tax, it's not clear that it matters too much where you get that LLM if what you're trying to do is just get training in tax. You might be also thinking about taking your LLM in the place where you're trying to get a job. So there's some geographic considerations there, but not necessarily, because a lot of the LLM programs, certainly in the US, are national programs.
And some of the programs if you go full time, you'll really find you have a community similar to your JD experience. And that may differ somewhat from school to school. So for one thing, when you're evaluating different LLM programs, you probably want to look on their website and see, do they have dedicated full-time tax faculty, or are they primarily relying on adjunct professors? Because if you find that the program is primarily relying on adjuncts and they're probably likely largely evening courses, you just should be aware that you might not have the same kind of experience as a program that has full-time tax faculty and a large cohort of full-time students. Students sometimes ask which programs are the most prestigious. And there, I think it's generally accepted that you look at US News and World Report and you look at the rankings for the tax specialty. And just be aware that rankings for the tax specialty are based on the law school's strength in that specialty, and that the school does not necessarily have a Tax LLM program. So just because they're ranked in it doesn't automatically mean they have a Tax LLM program. Those rankings, like the law school rankings, generally do change a bit from year to year, and you want to take them with a grain of salt, but it's been very consistent that NYU is the top ranked program in the tax specialty area. A few concerns or potential negatives about getting an LLM. There's opportunity cost. So you're going to be spending, if you go full-time, 2 semesters studying. And so you're not earning a full-time income during that time. So sometimes for those who could just simply get the tax job that they want without the LLM, or postpone getting an LLM until they can go part-time, it might not be appealing to go and do another academic year of school. There's also, of course, the tuition cost unless you get a scholarship. And some of the programs do offer scholarships, so that's worth investigating. And then the other thing, the biggest stereotype, I guess, that I've encountered that's really not true is occasionally students think that if they get a Tax LLM from a prestigious school, that'll be the ticket into any job of their choice. And the reality is that employers generally tend to look at your whole record. So they are going to see that you have the LLM, and it is another chance to potentially be at the very top of your class, but they're also going to look at your JD record and everything else you've done. So another thing that you might want to look at, especially if you're interested in some of the LLM programs that aren't ranked at the very top, is where do their graduates tend to be employed? And what is their percentage employment rate? And are they going to particular cities and to particular type of practices? So it's not that uncommon these days for tax lawyers to practice in Big Four or other accounting firms. Is that where they're generally placing their graduates? And is that something you're interested in? If you're specifically interested in New York law firms, for example, then you want to look and see how many of their graduates tend to go into those firms. Who's recruiting from the particular schools that you're looking at?
So just switching gears a little bit, what about students who are thinking about taking an LLM in another country? So I see this a lot, obviously living in Canada, lots of students sort of have an eye to the US to think about, maybe that opens some doors to some different career paths. When students come to me and ask about taking an LLM in another country, again, the question is, well, what's the idea there? The idea there could be just to get US training. And in that sense, if that's your goal, you just want to go and learn about US tax law from zero to hero kind of thing, then yeah, an LLM is probably a good way to go. There is just a question of what's the idea ultimately? Is it to get a job in the US? And then finally, what kind of job? Is it to get a job in a law firm, an accounting firm, and so on? Those kind of things all open up from that question of, should I take an LLM? And then I'll just give one more reason that you might want to take an LLM in tax or an LLM in general in another country. And that is just to go be a part of a different community and get exposed to the world. So, Canada has its own tax system, but our tax system is very much related to and interacts with other tax systems. So it could just be a fun experience and a good overall life experience to just broaden your knowledge of tax law from an international perspective. And in that case, you could look anywhere. You could look in Latin America, you could look in Europe, you could look anywhere in the world really, and just look at the different programs that are available. And I would say in deciding between programs at that scale, if you're willing to kind of look out at the world, then you should really pay attention to who the professors are and try to find a program that is going to offer you at least a couple things that you sort of know what you're getting into, and then build out from there.
Yeah, and then also if you are looking worldwide at programs, see if there are language requirements. So some programs do require that some percentage of the classes be taken in the local language, even if the majority of the classes are in English, for example. So you might run into issues like that. You might also find that the programs are a lot less expensive if they're outside of the United States.
Yeah, and then I think the final thing that I would add is that in some cases, an LLM might be a stepping stone to a doctorate degree, not necessarily in the US, but in Canada, that's not that unusual. So you might start to take that LLM thinking, okay, I'm going to start thinking about research and I'm thinking about tax policy, for example, and considering possibly enrolling in a doctoral program. The LLM can be a testing ground to see if that's really where you belong. It's a little less commitment than a doctorate, but it might also count towards your doctorate in some places. So that's something to check out as well.
Yeah, very different from the US. Thanks for joining us as you break into tax. Please like this video, and if you'd like more content from us, please subscribe.
See you next time.